You're 64 years old and you've accumulated a massive amount of money in your 401k, and you may be asking yourself the question, do Roth conversions even matter? That's what we're going to look at in our video today. Hello, I'm John Vandergriff. I'm one of the owners and the wealth planning team lead at Blue Ridge Wealth Planners, where we help people make planning decisions around their retirement years about the money that they have, even if they've got large amounts of money. And most people would look at this and say, well, gosh, why is this a problem scenario? May get some comments below where people say, I can't believe we're doing a video about this. Well, you don't have to watch it. But as we look at this is a planning scenario that we have come across where some people that have large savings balances inside of their 401ks, just look at it from a standpoint of, I don't need this money, why should I consider doing anything different with it? But we do want to analyze that to see if that is a good approach and what things can impact that. So what we're looking at today is a 64-year-old couple with $6 million, a little over $6 million in 401ks. So again, very simple questions. Do Roth conversions make a difference? And the simple answer on this, I think, will be a yes, but we need to get there with some actual data. So the first question that you need to ask when it comes to any kind of planning decision, but this in particular comes down to, first, what do you need the money for? So obviously, if you're in a position where you need to provide for, let's see, as we look at this, let's say you maybe need to provide for lifestyle. For this particular couple, that is not going to be a great need from this particular bucket. Maybe you're in a position where you say, okay, well, I'm worried about inflation and the impacts of that. I need to make sure that I'm able to provide growth potential on this money so that I can continue to live that lifestyle with increased costs in the future. And then, if you're in a position where maybe these two are a combination of that, then the last one becomes legacy. If you get to a point where you build a certain amount of assets, whether you want it to go to your children, charities, some combination, you may be looking at it and saying, how can I leave a lasting legacy that outlives me, but also do some things with that while I'm living? And again, all three of these, I think, can be benefited by decisions of making Roth conversions, because again, depending on what happens with taxes, as we look in a second, obviously, providing for your lifestyle may take more money in the future if taxes go up. That tax increase is going to have a similar impact to inflation. So as stuff gets more expensive and taxes go up, cause a larger amount of money to come out. And then from a legacy perspective, if your kids inherit money that's all pre-tax, the way the rules are now after the Secure Act went in place is they have up to, but no longer than 10 years to pay the taxes on this money. So if you've got a massive amount of money, and let's say in this scenario, we have two beneficiaries, well, each of them are going to inherit $3 million, and they're going to have, if they just spread it out over 10 years, over $300,000 a year that they're going to have to take out and pay taxes on top of any other income that they're making. So that could be a sizable amount of taxes that they're paying, not only today, but as tax rates go up in the future, that's something that we look at. And so as you can allude to or understand, my second question does revolve around taxes, and it's a question, will your tax rate go up? So if the answer to this question is yes, then Roth conversions are something you want to pay attention to. I'm going to give you a simple example there, but as we look at this is a simple question, but there's really three impacts that can happen when it comes to tax rates and how they can affect you. So the first of those impacts are the brackets themselves, and what we're notably talking about is the percentage bracket that you are paying as you cross into different thresholds there. How much of that is going toward the IRS from the income taxable money you have? So that's the first way. The second could be through the impact on deductions, or maybe the lack of deductions that could happen, in a position where if we start looking at adjustments that the government they could do away with some deductions if your income gets to a certain level. We do have a lot of deductions and things that exist today, some ways that, maybe that could be cleaned up, could provide more income to the government, more impact to your money. And then the last one is the scarier and unknown, and that is just new taxes. So as we look at it on legislation that's been presented in both President Biden's attempt in 2021, but then also the most recent version of that now in 2024. There have been new strategies that have been put in place to either do away with existing things like stepped up cost basis, raising capital gains rates to the top tax rate, or even, new RMDs that may be presented depending on the level of IRA assets that you have. Almost, some people have tagged like a rich man's RMD. Again, those are some things that we don't know any way to really predict or strategize these, but we can look backwards and see the impact of deductions and percentage brackets as we start to make decisions. So again, without having all the variables, this is a simple example that I use to help us understand, what we need to consider in this conversation, because a lot of people will give different opinions on what you need to pay attention to if you have existing dollars in a 401k. And so again, I'm just going to use this as an example here. So let's say you're in a position where you have $1 million inside of your 401k. So what we have to look at is the impact of if you choose to do nothing strategically now, or if you choose to take that money and migrate it over through conversion. So obviously if we don't do anything, very simple example, no taxes are paid. They continue to be what's called tax deferred. And so you continue to show $1 million on your account balance because you will only be taxed on that money when it leaves the account. And so let's say you are in a position where if you made the decision to convert these dollars from a 401k into a Roth IRA or 401k, they all functionally work the same way. If you did this over, let's say, a 5-year period of time, but during that time, your effective tax rate on conversion was 24%, well, again, on this $1 million, and let's assume in this scenario, you don't have after-tax money to pay the taxes. So you have to pay your tax bill from this money, which sometimes a lot of people have an issue with. This is no different than if you have RMDs. You will probably pay the taxes out of those dollars when you're forced to take it, which will be down here. But let's say you're in a position where you pay that tax. Well, you are in a position where 24% is what it costs. So you start this, or over time, your tax base of what you converted over is about $760,000 compared to the $1 million of account value that you have now. And so people look at this and say, this is a reason why you should not do a Roth conversion, because you're going to take a 24% dip in your account value, and that's going to affect the growth rate that you have on this money moving forward. And again, from a simple math standpoint, that would make sense. If the market went up, after this conversion process had happened 10%, this side would make 100,000, this side would make 76. It looks like a bad deal. But as we look at this, we have to consider that these are no longer the same buckets of money. So this is growing a fully taxable growth. This, as long as we have the account in place at least 5 years and you take distributions over 59.5, we'll have tax-free withdrawal potential. And so as we look at this, let's assume, so that this can truly be a tax discussion, that both of these double and are invested in the same thing for the same length of time. So that way this is truly a discussion about tax rates more than investment rate of returns. Even inflation impact is negated with this scenario. So if we're in a position where this doubles in value, so we've got, $1,520,000 that we get out of this, and then we got $2 million here. Most people would look at this and say, okay, well, if you're in a position where you have this scenario, you've made a terrible decision because you've got almost $500,000 less money than if you would have just left it alone. Well, it depends on what happens when you go to take this money out. If it's at least 5 years in the future, there is no taxes owed on any of the funds that are taken out of this, whether it's conversion principal, contribution, or growth. That money is available to you tax-free. The IRA here, it depends on what the tax rate is at the time. So let's say you start taking out distributions and the tax rate is the same as it was when you started. If you were to take distributions out of this account at the same tax rate, you will notice that our bottom line scenarios are exactly the same. Now, truth be told, if we were in a position where you took the entire thing out, you may jump into several different tax brackets. But I'm just giving you an example here with particular tax rates. This is not predicting that it's 24% on $1 million today. But this just goes to show that some people think because this grew faster, it will have more money. But the argument is, if the tax bracket at the end is the same as it is at the end is the same as the beginning, you have the same end result. And some people say, well, that's on the whole bucket. Well, it's per dollar. If you pulled $1 out of this, you would keep the same percentage of that dollar here as you would here. Okay, so it's percentage basis more than anything else. So as we look at this, what we've got to try to find is when can you leave this account where it costs you the lowest percentage? Because the way a lot of retirement plans are built is that if you are in a position where taxes went down, you would actually benefit more per dollar of distribution if you left it alone in a tax-deferred position, even though this side is growing tax-free. But I think with a lot of the conditions that we have going on, with the spending that's taking place, issues with Social Security, servicing our debt that's now becoming more of an issue, the likelihood that this number goes down over time is, I think, pretty low. And so if we get to a position where, 24% becomes 30%, doesn't sound like a huge difference, but that $1,520,000 number that you have net of taxes now drops to $1,400,000. And again, it's just, that's if taxes go up marginally as we look at this. I mean, that's a pretty significant increase as you look at percentage, because that's about a 25% tax increase. But as we look at this, that's the kind of stuff that we have to be aware of when it comes to tax rates now and tax rates in the future, and the likelihood that if you're in this situation, and especially in the one that we're looking at today with $6+ million in a 401k, you're going to have distributions that are going to start whether you need this money or not. Okay, so if you've done a great job saving, you've paid off your debts, you don't have a large expense, the government's going to step in and make you start taking money out of this bucket whether you need it or not. So as we look at this situation, 64-year-olds, they retire now, $59,000 of combined Social Security. Today, they need $150,000 net, so as a percentage, again, less than $100,000 off of, as we look at this, about $6.5 million of total investment net worth. So very good situation for these people to be in. But what you're going to see is that these assets will continue to grow over time. And as those assets grow, so will the amount that they will be forced to take out whenever they, cross into RMD territory. Because as we look at it now, for them, RMDs will start at age 75. If they just started taking it out today, I mean, they're going to be forced to take roughly 4% of this bucket, which is going to be somewhere between $240,000 to $250,000, and that's today. That's not 11 years of growth above whatever their small amount of need is by percentage. So as we look at this, they're going to have a building tax problem, and the question is, as we look at that and we look at kind of our plan for everything framework here, if their gross income today is $165,000, their tax rate is 22%. The question is, how much tax will they end up paying on this bucket over time by percentage? Because it's going to go on top of things, it's going to progress upward. Unfortunately, that RMD is going to make Social Security more taxable, probably make their Medicare more taxable as we start to look at the impacts of IRMA. But on the flip side of that, if we can do conversions, we can also get those benefits of those tax rates potentially going down on Social Security, the impact to IRMA going down because we're lowering the amount of mandatory distributions that are necessary. So as we look at this, 2024 tax brackets, we see that the 22% bracket goes up to $230,000 of income. So they could do conversions in the 22%, definitely in the 24%. And then the question becomes, are these other upper end brackets worth paying attention to when it comes to conversions? And so as we look at this, the primary things we're going to look at in this video is the tax rates now, but also the tax rates as they were in 2017, which are actually what the 2026 brackets are set to revert back to if we do not have an extension of the current tax code as it exists now. So the 22% bracket as it exists would be at 25%. After they're supporting their lifestyle for their top dollar, which again, as we look at what they need, that's going to be where really RMDs are starting to have a negative impact to them. So it'd be, instead of 22 and 24, it'd be 25 and 28. But the risk is that, what if we don't stop there? So 1981 is the last time that we had a noticeably higher tax environment than what we've gotten used to, with the top bracket being at 70%. Instead of 37% as it is today. And so these figures are adjusted for inflation over the last, 40 some odd years. But notice that if you satisfy their lifestyle, you get them to the $165,000 of money they have today, their top dollar is going to be in the 43% tax bracket, which is almost double what that tax rate is today. And so as we look at that, that starts to become more impactful to those dollars. We're not going to look at that in the Roth conversion examples, because again, the truth is I don't know, outside of what the government has us in 2026, where those tax brackets go. My personal opinion, I don't think that we're going to stop at where those 2026 brackets are. I don't know, though, that we'll go to 1981. So we've got to use some nuance here to make sure that we're having a good discussion and not a everything's going crazy and scary, let's make decisions here. But this is the kind of stuff we have to pay attention to. Whether you're wanting to use this money for lifestyle or legacy, it's going to have an impact on you when tax rates go up on these pre-tax dollars. So as we look at this, I want to transition now to a planning software that we use to just measure some of the impacts of these kind of decisions. So what we're looking at here, this is the situation that we laid out, $6.5 million for this couple, but showing them in a 75-25 split, 75% tracking the Russell growth index. I think it's Russell 1000 growth index, and then we've got the aggregate bond index for Barclays as the 25%. So this just, it could be anything. You could have it 60-40 or whatever your projection is, but for this scenario, this shows the impact of doing that over time, seeing it go trailing up to the right. But also measuring the impact of, once they get to 75, having to start taking money out for RMDs. So as we look at this, what I want to throw in here is a few scenarios that we can pay attention to, because as we look at this is the kind of conversations that we have where we want to look at this and say, what if we don't change our investments and all we do is go to the top of the 24% bracket now, or the 28% bracket, and notice that in paying, just whatever it takes to get to the top of those brackets, we do fall behind, but then we do catch up toward the end. And so we're in a position where, even though we didn't change the investments at all, because we did not have forced distributions once they got to 75 moving forward, we did have a scenario where by 90, they were able to catch back up and actually have, a little bit higher value to the tune of, as we looked at here, almost $800,000 based on their projections. And again, this is using the current tax code for 24-25, and then 26 forward, the 2017 brackets, and obviously they're adjusting that for inflation based on this planning software. So now if we looked at a scenario where we said, okay, well, let's do all of our conversions before RMDs, is that a good idea? Well, we see in this scenario, you never really catch back up because of the big difference here. We see in our biggest one, you're somewhere between $3.5 and $3.7 million behind. You don't really make up the difference there. So we've got to be careful not to have discussions where we say we need to convert everything at once. There are some situations where that would be beneficial, but there are some situations where that may be overly aggressive. The key here, whenever we have this conversation, is really starting to use the combination of tax planning and investment changes that make sense based on the buckets that you have. So what I'm going to show you here is what happens if we make some investment changes, and as we do Roth conversions, we realize that those Roth accounts are now in a position where they do not have forced distributions. So what if we moved that Roth allocation, instead of the 75% in the Russell Growth Index, 25% in the aggregate bond index, we moved it to more aggressive, since it's growing tax-free and it does not have forced distributions. What if we change that percentage to 90% in the growth index and 10% into the aggregate bond index? Well, as we look at that, if we do that same scenario of only filling up the 24 to 28% brackets whenever we're in, before RMDs begin for them, which is 11 years later, notice that their green line, which is how much they're above what they would have done if they did nothing, really catches up to them at 84 in their projections, and then they're in a position where they end up showing a value gain of about $2.5 million. So obviously this is a projection, this is not your numbers, but this is something that we can run very similar based on your investment situation and see what some of the impacts of those Roth conversions are. And you say, well, gosh, why do these people care? They're going to have, over $20 million no matter which decision they choose. Well, as we look at this, and actually not that high, over $15 million no matter which decision they choose. Again, when it's your money, you have a responsibility to be a good steward with it. You want to make good decisions. And again, our job as planners is to help you find a way to make the best decision, whether you've got $6 million in your 401k or less than $1 million in your 401k. That's what we're designed to do, is help people make good decisions. And as we look at this, going back to our conversation of, what do we want this money to be used for? If it is a conversation about legacy, what I want you to notice is the last example that we looked at with making changes to the investments and then Roth conversions only maximizing the 24 or 28% brackets. As we look at this is a comparison where we can look at them side by side. And what I want you to notice is, your tax-free assets or your orange line here, so you see that building over time as you do conversions. This did not show any conversions, but if you're looking at this from purely a legacy perspective, look at the difference. So what we have here is a scenario where, let's see, this bucket over here is all taxable assets that build significantly once their RMDs start, because they're forced to take out money that they don't need and pay whatever those tax rates are. But then their tax deferred bucket, even though they're taking pretty hefty withdrawals, continues to grow. And so going back to our scenario before, let's say they're in a position where they've got 2 kids that they're passing these assets to. The way the rules are now, they would get a stepped up cost basis on this if this was stock investments or market traded investments, as long as that rule doesn't change. But the tax deferred assets would be split in half, so they'd have $6.5 million that would go to each child, and that would have to be have taxes paid within a 10-year time frame, which would be substantial amounts of taxes at whatever those tax rates are in the future. So as we look at this, you compare that to this situation, we do still have some tax deferred assets, we do have taxable assets, but notice that they've got about $10 million of tax-free assets that can allow them to be in a position where even after taxes are taken out, have more money that they can leave to the children or charities or whatever that legacy conversation looks like. So again, a lot of things to look at here. That's why for us, from a planning conversation, when we sit down with individuals, we want to start from the very basics of what is it that we're trying to do and start to weave that through the conversation of income, investments, taxes, healthcare, family, legacy. But what you'll notice is that there is a lot of overlap in these conversations. And like we just highlighted with investment decisions and tax decisions, by making those in combination with one another, it can lead you to have better end results depending on what it is that you're trying to do. And sometimes the decision is do Roth conversion, sometimes it's not, or sometimes it's pay attention to the numbers and only do so much. So as we look at this, if you've not really had anybody that's walked you through a discussion like this, we'd be happy to look at your situation and see how through holistic planning, including decisions about taxes and paying strategies, income planning, investments, how can you come up with a solution that allows you to have really all the things you want, but also the most efficient use of your dollars that you've worked hard for and saved for. If you see the link below this video, I would encourage you to click that and schedule a time where we can talk to you about your situation and see if the planning that we've done for many families in this area could be a match for you. But with that said, hopefully you learned some things today. Leave us some comments below with some questions that you may have. Obviously, we went through this fairly quickly, but hope you enjoyed our content today, and we look forward to sharing more videos like this with you in the future.